Hi, I'm Paul Sharp and I'm here at D'Addario. I work at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And I'm here to talk today about proper instrument setup and looking at double basses to purchase. There are a lot of characteristics that go into a well set up bass, and I'm going to talk about some very specific ones that you can check out on your own before you buy a bass, and things that will aid you in knowing whether your bass is set up so that it's at its best playability. Comfort is just about everything with playing the bass. A little pain gets you out of that practice room and discourages young students from practicing as much as they would like. First of all, I would recommend going to a very reputable string dealer, and preferably with a person who is employed by them who has devoted some time to the study of proper bass setup. Once you've found that kind of shop, you can go in and look at a few characteristics that I'm going to explain. The first thing I would have you look at is the quality of bridge on a bass you're interested in purchasing. And that is that you find a quarter sawn maple bridge, fine quality. You can see, if you look at a quarter sawn bridge, there's a lot of fine vertical flecking in the bridge running this way. The more flecking, the better, all right? That means it's quarter sawn. It's going to be a much stronger bridge and be less susceptible to warping. A cheaper bridge is going to have an abundance of horizontal markings, which you can vaguely see in this quarter sawn bridge, and very little vertical flecking. Bridges like that will tend to warp very quickly, which is definitely something you don't want to have happen. Bridges also can cost around $200 plus to purchase and have set up again. So it can be a costly problem if you have a bad bridge on your instrument. Another thing I want you to check out is just look at the end pin. On a well set up bass and from a good shop, the end pin in your bass will have a nice cork lining. You can see on this bass that it's got this lighter color in the center. That's cork. That softens the contact between the metal of the end pin and the end pin socket here. If you're going to too hard surfaces like metal to wood in the case of some cheap end pins, or if you're going to metal on metal in the case of some very cheap end pins, that is going to buzz and buzz pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that there's a nice lining in the end pin. It's a mark of high quality. Another thing I would check out is that this fingerboard should have a nice round arc to it. Not enough arc and a flat fingerboard will mean that bass is just not set up properly. It may have been set up for using a rockabilly band or other things, but if you get the bow on there and it's too flat, it's a very difficult thing to correct. A poorly set up fingerboard can run $1,000 to replace, and that's being conservative. Finally, you'll want to see if the double bass you're looking at has bridge adjusters, which are these things right here on this bass. It's very helpful if you're a student to be able to adjust the bridge. There are several reasons for that. One is that the bass is made out of very large sheets of wood, and wood expands and contracts with the weather, particularly how dry it is or how humid it is. So if you go to sleep one night after playing your bass and everything feels perfect and it was kind of dry that day, and then wake up the next day and it's pouring rain, you can discover that those strings have raised perhaps 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch even. With adjusters, it's very easy. You just turn these things, the bridge raises or lowers depending on the direction you go. It's just crucial that you turn each adjuster the same amount. One adjuster should not be jacked up higher than another. If your bass doesn't have those, and particularly if your bass is fully carved, meaning it's solid wood, I would suggest investing a little money from the start and just getting adjusters installed. It'll make your life a lot easier later on. Another aspect of a bass purchase is checking to see how much care the shop put into setting up the instrument. One of the very important characteristics of this is string height. And you want to check the string height along 3 areas. And each of those will inform you as to how well set up your bass is, or the bass you're interested in purchasing is. The first place is probably the simplest place to check, and that is right here at the nut, the very top of the instrument. The string rides over the nut and then vibrates freely where the nut ends at the fingerboard. What you want to do is take a little business card and slide the business card under that nut. And if it catches just a little bit, you've got good height under there. Closer is even okay too. A piece of paper can be slid under probably G, D, and A, and have that piece of paper catch, you're still fine. Where we get into trouble is where that nut has not been adjusted properly. It's a very simple fix, but it kind of shows how much care the string dealer put into setting up their instruments. If that nut is too high, they just take a file and pull it down. The E string requires maybe just a little bit more space, maybe the thickness of a credit card under the E string. Another example of string height to look at is how high that string is off the board, the fingerboard, at the bottom of the fingerboard. You'll just take a little tape measure or a measuring stick and measure the height from the end of the board to the string. And these heights are specific to each string. I got these measurements from Bob Bierman, who's a guy who sets up my bass and that of many of my students. And he usually aims for about 6 millimeters on the G string, 7 millimeters of height off the board for the D string, 8 millimeters for the A, and 9 millimeters for the E. That's not a lot of height. Some bass players look for maybe a millimeter more or 2 on there, and some may go a millimeter lower, depending on their playing style. If it has adjusters, you can go a little bit, probably a millimeter lower than those, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can then know that you can adjust them higher if you need. That height is pretty critical, because how hard you press those strings down is something that really can encourage or discourage your practice time. Comfort tends to be just about everything with the bass, particularly when you're just starting out. The final place to measure the string is the middle of the string. You want to do this by firmly pressing down the string at the end of the board, and then taking your little measuring stick and measuring to see where there is about, so that there's about 1 to 2 millimeters of clearance in the middle of the fingerboard. It's a very slight amount of space, but that dip, that very slight dip of a millimeter or 2 in the middle of the fingerboard, right around the G harmonic, makes all the difference, because without it, your strings will buzz a lot. I see many basses that tend to buzz when the player plays anything above mezzo forte and forte. It's probably, or at least one of the reasons possible, is that their fingerboard has too little dip. It also can be that many bass players, knowing this, have taken their basses to a shop and asked to put dip in, and they've left, 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, even a centimeter dip in certain extreme cases. And that is a very difficult problem to fix as well. Again, problems with fingerboard setup can be costly ones. Good fingerboard, to replace it, starts at about $1,000. So this is something you want to check out thoroughly. I hope these setup points add a little bit of comfort to your purchasing a bass, or understanding why it's difficult for you to play your bass, or you get tired soon. All of these things can add up and make your playing experience either pleasurable or discouraging. Thanks.